And today's topic is navigating solar project, beginning of construction regulatory requirements. So we have had a number of questions from clients who are navigating this beginning of construction, also known as begun construction, start of construction under the new One Big Beautiful Bill Act. And so we decided to dedicate a tech talk to it. And we're also going to be publishing a memo, a free memo that will be available on our website, which is essentially a synopsis of this tech talk, but plus a lot more detail. Let's get into it. Before we get into the details of the topic, just for those of you who don't know VDE and VDE America, VDE is a German company that was established in 1893 by Werner von Siemens. Interestingly, some of you may recognize that name. He was a very famous man, sort of like the Thomas Edison or the Nikola Tesla or the Westinghouse of Europe. He helped establish the modern electrical grid in Europe. And as part of that, he and some of his colleagues founded VDE, which in German stands for Verbund Elektrotechnik, which means roughly the Society for Electrical Engineers, to ensure the safe operation of equipment on the electrical grid. So both power generation equipment and transmission equipment, and also retail equipment. And so that is still our motivation, our raison d'etre. And in the United States, we are a small group of engineers called VDE Americas, and we specifically focus on the safe and expected operation of solar power projects and energy storage projects. And most of our work is performing due diligence on those utility scale solar power projects on behalf of banks. We have a sister organization called Renewable Energy Test Center based in Fremont, California, which is one of the leading test laboratories for solar power equipment. And so we do a lot of collaboration with them and get a lot of data from them and whatnot. All right, just briefly, our services include independent engineering services. So we do IE reports, owner's engineering services. So like I was discussing, technical due diligence on behalf of banks and financiers. We also have a new inspection services set of services that we've really been doing for quite some time, but we're formalizing that. We have formalized that. And David Dever, who is joining me today as a co-speaker, is leading up those set of inspection services. We're also the world's leading provider of hail risk assessment services for the solar power industry. And we've worked on about $15 billion worth of financed operating PV and energy storage transactions equating to over 10 gigawatts of solar and 4.5 gigawatts of energy storage. So we have been successful in making a dent in helping the energy transition along and reduce global greenhouse gases. All right, so I'm John Previtali, and I'm a vice president and senior principal engineer. I've been in the solar power industry for over 20 years now. I spent about 10 years at Wells Fargo, working as their in-house engineer, helping to finance a lot of DG and utility scale projects. And I'm an engineer by training with a couple degrees. And we also have David Dever here, who's a principal engineer at VDE Americas, also with over 20 years experience in solar and over 15 years working specifically on power conversion devices like inverters. Also has experience from working at tracker companies like TerraSmart and Sunfolding, and he has a bachelor's in mechanical engineering from Alfred. All right, well, let's get into it. So what we're going to cover today is some critical deadlines associated with this beginning of construction requirements, specifically Independence Day of next year, July 4th, 2026. We're going to talk about a physical work test, these new requirements under Notice 2025-42, and as part of the One Big Beautiful Bill. qualifying activities, specifically on-site and off-site strategies that will help you meet the beginning of work requirement, documentation and continuity requirements, of course, tax credit impacts, and we'll also talk about VDE services. So, you know, if it's not obvious to folks, the reason this matters is because this will help, you know, meeting the beginning of construction requirements will help people get the investment tax credit or the production tax credit, so 30 to 50% of the project's fair market value within, you know, an achievable time frame of construction. You know, the big change that happened with the One Big Beautiful Bill was that, unfortunately, the 5% safe harbor that a lot of companies were using to, you know, achieve this criteria was eliminated for projects greater than 1.5 megawatts AC. So 1.5 megawatts AC is a very small, you know, typically like a rooftop project for like a big box retail store. So those those tiny, you know, C&I projects, you know, that you could still use the 5% safe harbor, but for anything above 1.5 megawatts, you have to use this different criteria, which is the begin construction criteria. And as I've mentioned already a couple times, the deadline for meeting this begun construction criteria is July 4th, 2026. Otherwise, you have 18 months ending on December 31st, 2027 to put your projects into service. So meeting the placed in service deadline for projects. So that's 18 months it's achievable, but it's, you know, hard to do. So it's good to, you know, in many cases, try to meet the begun construction criteria prior to July 4, 2026, and gives you a longer lead time for putting the projects in service. So here are some of the critical deadlines. So August 15, 2025, the One Big Beautiful Bill was passed, and it eliminated the 5% safe harbor. September 2nd, 2025 is when this physical work test was implemented, so now required for above projects 1.5 megawatts AC. And then, as I mentioned now probably 4 times, July 4th, 2026 is when projects will have to have demonstrated a material begun construction in order to qualify for ITC or PTC, and have the projects placed in service by December 31st, 2029 for a 2025 start, or December 31st, 2030 for a 2026 start. And then if you don't meet the July 4th begun construction criteria, you would have to have your projects placed in service by December 31st, 2027. So there are 2 methods to establish begun construction, aka beginning of construction, also known as performed work. One is the physical work test, which can be either on-site or off-site. And this is going to be a focus of the talk today. And then there's the 5% safe harbor, but as I mentioned, only for projects less than 1.5 megawatts AC. Okay, so this is where I'm going to hand it over to David Dever. So David Dever is going to talk about physical work test requirements first. So go ahead, Dave.
Yeah. Thank you for having me, John. So, you know, the significant change here is the work, you know, it's been performed. It hasn't been begun by this date, you know, July 4th, 2026. You have had to have materially performed work to claim this. And this signals a real heightened security around the documentation requirements for this. And this hasn't been executed yet, so this is somewhat of a forward-looking statement. And we've polled a bunch of legal and accounting firms to get interpretation of this. Stay on that slide, please.
Mm-hmm.
The previous slide. Yeah, so there's no fixed minimum here. It's significant nature of work, and we're going to explore what significant means. And we'll run through an actual example of, let's say, a community solar or a DG 5 megawatt project. And when we talk about heightened security, we've got, binding written contracts are required here. This is part of this heightened security and examination. So we're going to explore both of these cases here, both the on-site work and the off-site manufacturing. The example we're going to use, we're going to split them. We're going to kind of do a little bit of both. On-site work is really good for site-ready projects where you're pretty well ahead in your design package. You may have your SWIPs in place already, and they involve foundations, above ground collection systems, some racking work, pretty straightforward documentation. The offsite stuff gets a little more complicated. This starts to blur the line, I think, with this 5%. And this is good for long lead time equipment. And we're going to talk about some caveats there. They typically involve transformers, switchgear, and very important program SCADA system. And this is going to have a higher burden of proof. And we're going to dig into this more. Let's go to the next slide. So this, to me, was one of the biggest revelations going through this process as we were combing the internet, because this is a forward-looking event, everyone has their own opinion. And so we looked at 9 leading law firms involved in this and one accounting firm, active in this space. And we found some real commonalities. If you look at kind of a Venn diagram, so to speak, we found, will is defined as greater than 95% certainty. So like very low risk here. Should, still fairly low risk. May, there's some interpretation. Will not, don't bother. No level, insignificant guidance. No one really knows. We expect this to change somewhat as we start to see and approach this July 4th, 2026. Let's go to the next slide. But I was really, really happy to be able to get that Venn diagram. So let's talk about some of these qualifying on-site activities. And I really want to start, of course, with the critical. You really want to look at getting a hold of your environmental permits before any physical work. And you don't need an exact site plan to do this, right? You can do a worst case interpretation. And these are 14 to 60 days, depending on the different state. And the reason we put this there is it's got a real significant penalty if you don't do that, right? If you think you're just going to roll onto site without an environmental protection plan and start breaking ground and hope you get the work done before you get a stop work order, that's not what we're recommending here. And we've got a long lead time out of custom critical switchgear. We'll get into that some more. I'm going to go down to the next level, which is this will level. And it's cited, in the legal documents. Drilling, driving pile foundations for tracker or fixed tilt systems. Again, you don't have to do the whole thing. Installing torque tubes, mounting rails, ground screws, helical pails. This is the structural aspect of it. Above ground collector systems with custom switchgear, this is a really easy thing to do, especially on these DG sites. We're used to these cab-based systems or, other systems that drive piles into the ground and stretch your grounding cable and, have custom racking foundations for your DG inverters. And some of this can be done off-site and on-site. And then service access roads. But it's really important to notice here, it's not a laydown yard. It's not parking for construction. Very specifically defined as the service road. So don't be thinking you can make a big parking lot in the beginning of your site and thinking that's going to qualify, because it's not. It has to go all the way down for servicing your equipment. So this is really on the very low risk level. And then the should level, which is still fairly low. Foundations or equipment pads for centralist string inverters or substations. These are fairly generic, especially if you look at the smaller projects, the DG projects that are using string inverters. You can use an offsite strategy by coming up with your, unit start racking that's specific, and then putting the foundation on the ground. And be prepared for your medium voltage inverter foundation. These are relatively benign generic processes. Your medium voltage collection trenching, again, very low risk and fairly generic associated with the project. You're not putting a substation in at some of these DG projects. Larger projects, it gets more complicated. Looking at your met stations that are project specific, both the DAS and the SCADA foundations, they're specific to the project, to the location that qualifies for on-site, significant work begun. On the next slide, please. And please, write your questions down. I love questions because I'm not a mind reader. Like, I don't know what you're thinking. I'm trying to address your questions in this presentation. So I want to talk about some of the offsite because, I think, we were targeting and thinking about this, what's our real customer set here? And I continue to focus on it to smaller projects that maybe aren't as sophisticated and are a little further behind, but also have the advantage of they can move really fast. And I've got a plug for a company here at the end that I think can help you. And that's why we put both offsite and onsite. So let's talk about some of this offsite equipment. The main power transformer, this is like a wait time for 4 years. And that's for much larger sites. A lot of these DG projects don't have main power transformers, but medium voltage transformers, they can be project specific. And they have lead times of 6 to 12 months. And so buying this equipment, entering into our formal contract, this qualifies. There's a financial value associated with this. And it's not the cost, it's the fair market value associated with the project. And again, we'll
do have
talk
a question.
Yeah, okay, you want me to do them in situ? I'm happy to take them in situ.
Yeah, let's just hit this question. So is there a certain amount of money that qualifies as startup construction? I was under the impression that there is no more clear guidance on what amount of money qualifies, but is there an acceptable percentage or project economics that is a threshold that the industry is comfortable with for startup construction? Do you want to take that one or shall I?
You take that one, but that's a fantastic question, and we show that at the end, but go ahead and answer it now.
So there is no specific guidance on the amount of money or the percentage of cost that needs to be spent essentially to qualify for startup construction. So unfortunately, it's very murky. And but what we're thinking and what we've heard around the industry is that really having at least 2% of the project's total cost being spent for startup construction is safe. So there is no specific guidance. It just has to be a material amount of construction that needs to have occurred, or a material amount of offsite work that needs to have occurred. But we're thinking that probably 2% is a good threshold.
Yeah, and this is based on our polling and of the law firms and the accounting firms. I saw a couple other questions in.
Yeah,
I want to reserve one of those for the end. I'm not looking at them, so I don't know how to see them. Let me pull them up, I guess.
What are
the continuation requirements for the site work like for piles and racking? So, let's talk about reality of construction. Mobilization and demobilization, that's a significant cost. And people have asked, and I wrestle with this. It's like, do you have to be on site the entire time? No, the idea is by July 4th, 2026, you have begun construction and you can prove this in documentation. And then for continuity, you have to finish by a certain date. It doesn't mean you need to be out there every 6 or 9 months. It means you should start construction work when you have, like any other project, a clear de-risk line of sight on when you can get that utility to come out there and connect you. And whenever it is, you work back from that. And so if you want to go put in 200 to 400 piles, and again, whatever is economical. And we had this conversation a couple of days ago. You're not going to put 50 piles in. You're going to drop your PD10 or your Orteca out there. You're going to drop whatever makes sense in a few days, and that's going to get picked up in a week. And you can get back to that whenever you want. And I've got a plug at the end to kind of deal with some of those foundations. Really excellent question. And if I didn't answer your question, let me know.
We have another question.
Yeah, I see the civil. Go ahead.
Yeah. So from Peter Justin O'Brien, if we sign our civil works contract with a legally binding obligation, but works haven't yet begun, is this enough, or do we need to actually move dirt before July 4th, 2026? I'll take that.
Yeah, I'm going to pause for that for a little bit because I think we do address that about,
We do.
moving. Yeah, so let's pause on that. But
Okay,
that's a
and the
really good
next,
question.
yeah, you do have to move dirt, but that's the upshot of it. But what are the continuity? The next one is from Benjamin New. What are the continuation requirements for on-site work like piles and racking?
I thought
So
I just answered that.
we'll hit that. Yeah. Next is from Hugo Leduc. What documentation can you gather to prove the beginning on construction with SCADA?
Yeah, we
You want to
talked
hit that
about
real
that
quick?
we talked about that last night. So
Yeah.
look, SCADA can be considered generic catalog level items, and that doesn't qualify. And I think we do mention that later on here. So you got to program this. I mean, if you drop your Modbus registries and you start mapping this, you can do this offsite. And doing that work shows that this is custom specific to the project, to the equipment SCADA. That's an excellent question.
So like a list of Modbus maps. So basically like tags that are used to program the SCADA system to make it custom for the project.
Yeah, I mean, those of us who've been
Mhm.
in the industry a while know that most equipment has SunSpec compliant, registries. We load them up with different components. They're channeled to the master. It's not an overwhelming amount of work, but it provides that it's not catalog equipment.
What about a theory of operations document for the
I would,
project?
um, I'm not sure that feels more to me on the design side, John.
Oh yeah, that's a
And
good
and
point.
that's a no-no, right?
Okay.
Design and permittings, they don't count,
Mhm.
right? That's all
Okay.
theoretical.
Hmm.
Um, so I want to go on to the next slide, but keep me honest with a couple of these questions, John, as they come up, because I think we start to address them. So
Yeah.
let's talk about, again, what doesn't qualify. Site clearing, grubbing, or general grading. That doesn't qualify. So there is a question in here about moving dirt. You've got to move dirt, but you've got to move dirt in allowance with your civil plan specific to your cut, fill, and your grading. And yeah, you just can't shuffle dirt around. It's not going to work. Preliminary surveying or staking, that doesn't count. Engineering, design, and permitting doesn't count. Um, Letters of intent and deposits without manufacturing commitments. So you need to have deposits and firm commitments, when this stuff is going to be manufactured. So that's activities that don't qualify, and then equipment that does not qualify. Standard string inverters; those are inventory items. Solar modules, inventory. Any equipment that can be diverted to other projects, those don't qualify. So I think I answered the move dirt question in there. It's really got to be super site specific. And even then I think it's somewhat subject. But
Yeah.
I'm going to take that one and do a little more digging on that. So feel free to follow up because that is a good question. I think there's a certain grading in there, not to play a pun on words.
Hmm.
Documentation requirements. This has been asked here. Um, you know, this hasn't happened yet. We're talking a future looking, and without going into politics, we don't know what's going to change. But I would ask you, past predicts future. Is it getting easier in the solar industry right now? The answer is no. It's getting harder, and I think it's going to benefit us all. So for the first round here, we're really recommending caution and over documentation, which is, photographs, date stamp, GPS coordinates, weekly progress reports, binding contracts, engineering drawings that are stamped and project specific. They don't necessarily have to be stamped, but they have to be project specific. And if there's a contract associated with that, great. Contractor certifications, right? Sworn statements, inspector reports, third-party verifications, and we have services that can help you there. We have, other recommendations we can make depending on the size and the location. And then for offsite stuff, you need project-specific engineering specifications for your design. You need manufacturing progress reports for date and photographs, right? Someone may have to go to Brazil to check out your MPT. Some evidence. The intent is to prove that it cannot be served as a general inventory, which addresses the SCADA equipment, right? It is print, program, and customize. factory test acceptance documentation, third-party inspector reports at facilities. And our best practice is really combine everything that you can. And, if you want to engage in some consultation on this, we can help you. But at the end of this meeting, we're going to publish on our website something I kind of argued against. It's the most thorough template and memo associated with this I've seen, on this subject. So I would take a look at this and decide, what helps you and what doesn't. It may answer additional questions or bring up additional questions you haven't thought about. We've got go ahead.
We have a follow-up question from the gentleman asking about moving dirt. He says, if my definition of moving dirt is specific access roads, does this qualify?
Yes.
Access roads for working on the project after it's operational, right? Not for just constructing the project.
Not for construction. It is very specific. This is one of the interesting areas of why would they get so specific on this? It's like they had a civil guy on the committee. It is specific to the access roads used to maintain the project after construction. So getting access to the site doesn't count. The parking lot doesn't count.
Yeah. And we have a question from my old friend, Eric Ma. Hello, Eric. Is a work order instead of a full contract for building a concrete pad sufficient? Work order as opposed to a full contract. That's a tough one.
Yeah, there's going to be a couple here we're going to have to take offline and maybe amend our documentation afterwards when we publish it, because that's, we weren't mind readers. This is a forward looking. We don't have all the answers, but I want them.
Yeah. I feel like probably a work order is good enough because it's a binding, as long as it's a binding contract, Another from Hugo Leduc. What about foundational and reinforcing products? Are they within the scope of startup construction?
Yes.
Yeah. One more question.
That's in the will. Yeah, I see this question on modules.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You want to read it?
Yeah, one more question on modules. The notice talks about the requirement for site-specific equipment. When I talk to my module rep, they tell me that so as long as we have legally binding contract signed, where the modules are specific to or specified to the specific project, is this enough to qualify? Do you agree?
No.
No, because they can be diverted to any other project at any other time. That's a catalog standard item.
Yeah, there's no custom modules out there.
No.
Yeah. Okay, should I keep going? Next slide.
Yeah, next slide, please. Thanks.
Okay.
So continuity requirements, and I think I touched on this a little bit. We get this 4-year safe harbor. So if you start in 2025, you got to be done in 2029. If you start in 2026, you got to be placed in service for December 31st, 2030. And like, again, it doesn't mean you need to be there all the time. However, if you miss those 4 years by excusable delays, transformer shortages, utility interconnection delays, force majeure, then you have to maintain actual physical construction. And so if you're going to miss some of this, you have to maintain continuous. But I don't imagine a situation where you don't qualify for the January 6th, 2026. If you meet that begun construction, you're fine to demobilize. You come back when you have that clean line of sight that you can start and stop once. It's not that you have to come out every 6 months, every 9 months. That is not here. It's get the begun work verified and have the documentation to show that you're still working in the backside. This question just came in from Richard Bennett, and that's a familiar name. Would the same hold true for racking contract? Or is that, no, a racking contract is project specific as long as it is project specific. So generic torque tubes, not going to work. Like anything that can be diverted associated with this isn't going to work. And I think I'll drop my plant now. I had spoke to a company called Planted Solar, Planted, Planted. And they're unique in the fact that they're offering like an accordion style project. And they do a lot of this design work, project specific work, and self-performing, or they have service partners. And so I was really surprised their timelines that they were providing. You know, if they want to develop, or if you want to get going and you don't have an established relationship with a racking company, it may be a good alternative to satisfy some of your foundation requests and your racking requests. But yeah, the racking has to be project specific. So you need to be engineered to an ASC, you know, location according to 7.16, and you need to be having structural reports, geotech analysis. This work needs to be sunk and then correlated back to that project specific steel. So hopefully that answers that question. I don't have anything else.
You want to talk about
Yep.
the excusable delays and not excusable? I don't know if you hit that
Yeah,
part of it.
I mean, not excusable is like, so you're having financial issues, ownership changes, business decisions to pause. None of that's excusable, right? These excusable delays, you know, they recommend, you know, they recognize transformer shortages, utility interconnection delays you can't control, force majeure, and this is why I've put in there several times, you know, keep a line on site when you have utility interconnection, because you know, do they always come out on site on time? No. And so yeah, those are excusable, and we got the, they're pretty straightforward. There's no mystery there.
Great, thank you. All
I'm going to
right.
let you take some of this. It's more on the legal side.
Yeah. So, so now we're looking at what sort of parameters does this beginning of construction lock in? So one is prevailing wage rules. So the begin construction criteria will lock in the prevailing wage that you can use for the project. Also, domestic content. So domestic content, as noted here, has different percentage requirements depending on the year. Also, the energy community PTC bonus. So you can lock in the entire 10-year period starting, before July 4th, 2026, if you hit the begin construction criteria. And also, with regard to the FEOC thresholds, the earlier that you start that, the greater supply chain flexibility you have to choose equipment that meets FEOC requirements. And just to note that projects greater than 1 megawatt AC must comply with prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements. So at least 15% of labor hours for full credit rates. So I think people probably know that already, but just wanted to emphasize that. And another thing I just wanted to note here, which was crazy for me to learn. There's a huge difference in FEOC risk considerations, and FEOC is, for people who don't know, it stands for Foreign Entity of Concern, right? And it's basically, the idea is that we as a country don't want to give business to countries we find hostile towards us, or who may try to do things like include equipment for espionage, or like undermining the performance of our utility grid and whatnot. And so these countries are China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. And so there are these provisions that require that no payments be made directly to companies operating in, or not necessarily operating, but owned by entities in these countries. And so if there is a FEOC, if a payment is made to a company in one of these countries for an ITC deal, really any time within the 10-year ITC recapture period, this is 10-year, not 5-year, then the entire ITC is recaptured. It can be recaptured. I'm not saying it will be, but it's feasible for it to be recaptured, which is just seems like a crazy risk. For PTCs, for PTC deal, production tax credit deals, the risk is not as great. So if a payment is made to an entity in one of these countries, then only the production tax credits for that year that the payment has been made can be recaptured. So really it's a pretty amazing incentive to do PTC deals, which is just really interesting to me. I don't know if we're going to start seeing a lot more PTC deals because of this or not. But yeah, this is what it is. So obviously the strategic implication is with, so much of the supply chain coming from China. Really, it seems like a better bet to do PTC deals when you can, as opposed to ITC deals, at least for this FIAC risk. Bit crazy. All right, back to you, David. You're gonna talk about a 5 megawatt project case study.
Yeah,
the anonymous solar project.
The anonymous solar project. Yeah, so I mean, we wanted to run through an example here. And this is, I wanted to go down much deeper and much more granular, but I got some pushback. So this is as detailed as I was allowed to present. But we'll talk about a 5 megawatt AC block, 6.5 megawatts DC. We'll talk a single axis tracker, 20 250 kW string inverter, I should say string inverters, not central inverters. It's a cost of around $6.5 million, and we have a target COD of Q4 2027. And the real risk here is, how do you begin construction before this? How do you prove that you've begun construction before the July 4th date? And again, there's $3.25 million, 50% with ITC adders, and so it's not something you want to ignore. So I think I hit this earlier on, in the conversation, is that you really want to have want to file a notice of intent with your National Pollution Discharge Elimination System, or SWIP, Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan. This is really important, and you want to file a general construction permit. And typically you want to have a very comprehensive, and it's going to be about 40, 50 acres with a 100-foot buffer for an average 5 megawatt project, 6 megawatt project. So that's, like this, anyone who's been in the business long enough knows these things off the top of their head.
And you don't have to have the full design done at this point.
No,
right?
That's right. That's the point. You don't have to have the full design done. It's like, look, this is the area of my land. I'm going to, file these. I'm going to do a worst case. This is approximately where I think my roads are going to go in. It's very important to do this, because if you don't do this, what's going to happen is people are just going to, you're going to go out there and try to do some work, and someone's going to stop you. And look, an old mentor of mine, Jürgen Krinke, used to say to me, be a good neighbor. Like, as a solar professional, be a good neighbor. We want to be a good neighbor on the grid. We want to be a good neighbor to our physical neighbors. So you don't want to be out there like a Yahoo tearing the place up, getting a stop work order. It's just going to make your life difficult. So do the permits.
And this filing is initially just a notice of intent.
Yeah, so very low level here. This is very low level stuff. Very easy to do, very generic. So, we have a phase 2 and a phase 3 here. It's really like, this is a combination of the on-site and the off-site. Like, get your MPT or MVTs on order, get your SCADA ordered, get it programmed, start figuring out your on-site and your off-site work. And then, towards the end of the phase 3, it's like, get out there and get this done, and get it done before this July 4th, 2026. And I think you're going to see in the next slide, it's not a lot of work. It really isn't. And the lift is fairly low, as long as you have the right mindset. And then, as I had mentioned, some of the documentation we're going to provide shortly after this really helps walk you through how to go achieve some of these objectives. So let's go to the next slide. So, beginning of a construction, let's talk about central inverter foundations or your tracker pile foundations. These are your approximate costs. And this includes mobilization. This includes the machine sitting out there. This includes the operator, the piles, the drive times. And then you've got your MET and SCADA system foundations and your above ground collection system. This isn't rocket science. Like, the idea behind this is make this as generic as possible. And in a lot of these smaller projects, they're fairly rectangular. It's not 500 megawatts broken over, 19 different projects. And then the
this should be
offsite.
This should be string inverter instead of central.
Yeah, it should be string inverters. It's okay. But it could be one central inverter if you want to do a central inverter for 5 megawatts. I don't know that I would recommend that. I would recommend the strings. And like I said before, you can go build your rack offsite, and then you can bring it and you can put it in the ground. And then you're going to know you're going to need a medium voltage transformer foundation right beside it. And so, like, you can do this. I know it's not perfectly cost optimized, but if you're talking about saving 50% of your project costs by maybe eating some less than optimal decisions, like, do the math. I'm going for that 50%. I don't care if I take 7%. I want that 50. I'll take the 7 or 10% in inefficiencies. Now, the offsite manufacturing, again, custom medium voltage transformers, custom switchgear, project-specific SCADA. Get your MET station that's specific to your area. I mean, that now you're looking at, look, you got $186,000 spent. That's almost 3% of your $6.5 million cost. According to our interpretation and our discussions with the legal and the accounting teams, you've satisfied this physical work of a significant nature. And this isn't like anyone can go do this. It's under $200,000. Seems reasonable to me to go try to capture 50% of, 6 million.
Yeah.
Like to hear your thoughts on this.
Do you want to hit this last few
Yeah,
slides?
yeah. Documentation, like we talked about before, this hasn't been done. Solar isn't getting any easier. It's only getting harder. So error on the side of caution. Daily photographic logs, drone flyovers, and we have partnerships we can recommend. Third-party inspection reports, certified payroll records, really important. Factory inspection reports for offsite equipment. Make sure you get it. Make sure you put it into the contract. And then, engineering comparisons to really prove that this is custom specific to your site. It's not rocket science. It seems like common sense. It seems very daunting when you walk into it, but as you kind of walk through the process, it seems mostly common sense to me. And the key success factors, like get the barrier to stop work out of the way. File your permits. Super important. And then diversify your on-site and your off-site work, and we've given clear examples of this. MVTs and DAS as alternatives to MPTs, it probably makes a bigger sense. Like, go with your MVTs, go with your data acquisition systems, get everything lined up, get everything programmed. Give yourself some extra time, and right around 3% is what we're thinking that we need to do. It's what we've been hearing from all the people that supposedly know more than we do. You get that 3% in, you're going to preserve up to 50%.
Yeah, above 2%.
Yeah, but this says error on the side of caution, John. So that's exactly what I'm doing.
Okay, closer to 3.
Okay.
Yeah.
Something always goes wrong. As a field person who's built a bunch of these sites and sees a bunch of stuff break, like, things always go wrong. So, yeah, I mean, look at this case study right here. John, I'm going to hand this over to you because this is financial and legal.
Yeah. So yeah, this is just a very rough cost benefit analysis. So here in this particular 5 megawatt case, you have the base ITC that you qualify with prevailing wage. So that's 30% of the fair market value. So 1.95 million. Got domestic content adder, so another 650K. Energy community, another 650K, for a total ITC of 50% or 3.25 mil. And you've spent $186,000, meaning the beginning of construction investment. That obviously doesn't include like overhead cost of documentation, all the work that's required for like, getting the interconnection agreement, the site, all that stuff. So I know that this is on the low end, but with regard to demonstrating begun construction, this is $186,000. So you really have like around a 17 times return on investment, return multiple. So it's definitely worth putting that $186.5 thousand of work into qualifying for the begun construction. All right, so I'll just round it out here. Yeah, as David mentioned a couple times, we offer services that will help you verify begun construction. So including engineering recommendations, we can provide complete, tax credit qualifying scopes of work and specifications. We help you evaluate different foundation design alternatives with structural engineering. We have RFP templates that you can send to EPCs to actually satisfy the physical work test requirements, and also help you assess technical requirements for addressing IRS compliance and frameworks. So basically, just anything you need help with, we can help you with from a technical perspective, in collaboration with your attorneys, if you're probably working with attorneys in most cases. We also provide independent verification, so we can, review your plans and your documentation and provide a memo that you can share with, the IRS, independent engineers, your attorneys and whatnot, saying that, yeah, you guys have, according to our opinion, met begun construction criteria based on this documentation, this physical work, this offsite work, on-site work and offsite work, and also reviewing continuity verification of projects and when the 4-year limits approach. So we work for a large number of players in the solar segment. So project developers, owners, oftentimes the same entities, project developers and owners, tax equity investors, lenders, utilities, corporate off-takers, and insurers. So yeah, if you have any need associated with what we're talking about today, we should be able to help you. All right, that's it for our content. And yeah, let's open it up to any questions that people may have. So go ahead and put questions in the chat if you have any additional questions, and I will monitor them here.
Yeah, and I appreciate the in situ questions as we were going along. And look, if you've come up with a question later on, ask us, right? We're here to help you.
Yeah, feel free to contact us.
And if we don't have the answer, we're going to find the answer, and we may document it so that it doesn't happen again, right? The idea is that we're supposed to know the answers to the questions, but this is unknown territory.
Yeah, we're doing our best to figure it out. All right, well, I actually don't see any additional questions unless I'm missing something.
I'm not seeing any come in. That means we did a good job or bad job. One or the other.
Okay, people are thanking us. All right. Well, great. I think we could probably end early then. So thank you very much, everyone, for your attention. And yeah, this presentation will be available on our website shortly.